Excellent. So, sorry everyone, I woke up this morning fully congested, so there might be some throat clearing. I've got a bucket of water sitting here with me to help me get through the presentation. But good morning. Welcome to part 3 of our Cut to the Chase series presented by Microsoft and Model Technology Solutions. And as Jeff alluded to, this series has been focused on securing the modern workplace. And in part 3, when you think of security and all the different layers that are put together for your organization, part 3 is really in a post-breach scenario. Analysis, reaction, how do you chase something down when you've been notified either through AV that there's a breach or otherwise, right? And so we'll cover that, and the goal here is to introduce you to maybe a 100, 200 level of Defender ATP. So before you can really dive deep into the technology, you really have to understand what's available in the technology, the requirements are, getting it deployed, some of those pieces. So this session is really served as a let's get you up to speed on ATP, and certainly happy to go deeper if we need to. I think that if you're looking to go into a very deep, specific conversation, we can schedule something after this webinar. But we'll have time at the end for questions. I don't anticipate that we'll go through the whole hour. We'll probably end up a little bit early. But as Jeff said, Jeff is monitoring the IM chat window. For those of you that are watching a recording, don't type in the chat window. It does not work. But he'll monitor it live here, and if you have questions, we can stop, pause, and answer those questions. So, all right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. So the agenda for today, we'll go through the introductions of who Model is and who I am. We'll talk about ATP, and we'll give a broad definition of it. We'll walk through deploying ATP, and we'll go through a demo, right? So at the end, we'll leave time for questions and answers, but if you have a relevant question during the session today, don't hesitate to type in the IM window. All right, so Model Technology Solutions. So we have 2 different divisions of Model. We have a consulting division and a managed services division. Our team of consultants come in from a identify, design, build, operationalize technology perspective to help your team either put in new technology, design it, engineer it, or be another set of hands for you. So from a technical perspective, Azure OMS, Azure IaaS, EMS, Azure AD, Premium, and then on the on-prem side, Hyper-V, all things System Center, etc. And so we do a lot of custom PowerShell, a lot of automation and workflows. On our managed services side, it's really an extension of your team for managing some of your day-to-day tasks and things like using System Center for compliance reports against patching or SLAs, things like that, so that your team can be focused on driving your business forward, and you can ensure that the things that are really important but don't necessarily drive revenue in your organization, such as Windows patching, that's being done according to your SLA. So those are our 2 divisions that we have at Model. Overall, we stay really focused into our swim lanes of technology, and we really want to build the right solution for your organization from a variety of tool sets. We don't veer outside of our comfort zone too much. We make sure that we have relationships in those areas if we need to. And then we're a Microsoft Gold and Silver partner in Data Center and in Windows and devices. So about me, so I'm managing partner, Jason Rutherford. I'm the managing partner of Model Technology Solutions. Going into, I need to update that, my 17th year of IT. I've got a couple of children and a lovely wife. I'm a CrossFit enthusiast, enjoy the workouts. And then what seems like forever ago, I was the technical editor of the Mastering System Center Configuration Manager 2007 R2 book from Cybex. And more recently, I was a contributor on the Microsoft white paper, the release pipeline model, which is really about the DevOps and how to apply that on the Windows platform, right? So, sorry for all the throat clearing again. So let's talk about ATP and define that, right? So what is ATP? Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection is a security service that enables you guys to detect, investigate, and respond to threats on the networks in a post-breach scenario. And so again, right, every organization has many layers of security. You should have an external firewall at a minimum. You should have AV on the endpoints. And when you start looking at those layers, there should be multitude of layers, but one of the layers you can't forget about, which is oftentimes overlooked, is what do you do in a post-breach scenario? How do you, so let's say that you, yeah, that's a good point. We'll touch about licensing in a little bit. So in a post-breach scenario, you need to be able to identify what the impact was to your network, what commands were ran, what's on the machine, how infected are you. You don't want to find out later that the one machine wasn't the only one that got infected. Maybe it infected another machine and it slept for a while, right? And so you have to have some kind of layer against that, and that's really what Windows Defender ATP is meant to do. So why would you want to put something like that in, right? The reasons I just mentioned are a big one, but the FBI director came out with a couple of statistics here that, there's 200 plus median number of days that attackers are present on the network before detection, which is kind of a scary scenario, right? It's 80 days on average after detection to full recovery, and so you want to try to lessen that time to recovery as quickly as possible. You want to minimize the impact of lost productivity, lost revenue, and growth as much as you can. And then the data breaches are expensive, so the faster you're able to put those to rest, the better off you're going to be kind of overall. And so I thought this was a pretty clever saying. There's two kinds of companies, those who know they've been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked yet, right? So you want to make sure that you have the information, even if it is ugly. All right. So how does it work? So it uses a multitude of technology built into Windows 10 and Microsoft's robust cloud service, right? And so one thing to note, it can use data from Linux and servers. And so while this is a Windows 10 focused session, there are other ways to get data into the ATP tenant. So endpoint behavioral sensors, right? So these sensors collect and they process signals from the OS, for example, files, registry, network communications, and it sends that data into your isolated private cloud instance of ATP. Okay, so it's built in to Windows 10. Using some of the big data machine learning pieces in the Microsoft Azure ecosystem, all of this data is brought in and made sense and rationalized against the data from your tenant as well, which basically gives you a translation of insights, detections, and responses that are available out in the wild to some of these threats, right? So knowing that you have a threat in your network is one piece of it, but then what do you do about it, right? How do you take action about it? Well, if you're taking data, not necessarily company-specific data, but data about what has happened in other organizations and how to apply that to a fix, that's one of the benefits of using ATP. The threat intelligence, so similar, right? So you have Microsoft hunters, security teams, and then threat intelligence pieces provided by partners. All of this information goes into that same cloud analytics engine to help make sense out of the threat in your environment, right? So taking all the pieces of data, the heuristics from the machine, what's happened in other environments, and then proactive people that are partners with Microsoft gathering data and intel about what's going on, all comes together in your ATP tenant. And what that looks like, just from a kind of a graphic standpoint, is up here in the top end of it is going to be your private ATP tenant. So just as we talked about, so partners of Microsoft, Windows hunters that are looking for new exploits on machines, cloud monitoring and reporting, all of these pieces are fed into your ATP tenant, just like all of your, whoops, let's go back. Just like all of your onboarded endpoints are feeding their data from the registry, from the file, all those pieces are being fed into that same ATP tenant. And what the output of that is it's basically some analytics of what's going on in your environment in a post-breach scenario, right? And I saw a question pop up. Jeff, are you fielding the questions on the I am just confirming?
Yes, I am. I'm looking at the questions right now.
Okay, thank you. We can answer whatever we can answer when we get back. All right. So some enhancements of the latest edition of ATP. There's improved script-based attack detection, which we're going to look at today. That's the easiest one to kind of demo without putting anything in harm, is running some rogue scripts on your network and finding out what happened during that process. Application guard integration, and then new detection methods are constantly being released. Things for like key logging or password thefts and credentials, things like that. So all of this data is constantly being upgraded and integrated into your ATP tenant and into the new editions of Windows. So application restrictions are another feature of the latest edition. More granular isolation, which we're going to talk about in some detail, but when you need to isolate a machine from an attack, you can isolate it in two ways. You can do a full isolation or a partial isolation. It really depends on the severity of the attack and what you want to do to investigate that attack. And so we'll talk about that and what the requirements are for those specific pieces of it. But there's constantly more integrations into the ATP service, right? So from a high level, that was our introduction to ATP. So let's look at what some of the OS and licensing requirements were or are in order to deploy ATP, right? So operating system requirements, Windows 10 Enterprise, Education, Pro Education. If you're looking to feed data from Linux, Bitdefender Antivirus, and then from server-side pieces, you can use the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, which is also the OMS agent and the SCOM agent. So it's all the same agent. You can configure another tenant to push that data to, and it pushes that specific data into your ATP tenant. From a Windows 10 version, it must be 1607 at a minimum. And then if you looked at some of the features that are in ATP's portal, there's a series of features that unlock at 1703 and features that unlock at 1709. And that's really because as Microsoft is releasing these feature updates to the operating system, they're embedding more capabilities of what you can do in a post-breach or analytics scenario. So whether it's gathering more data or taking more action or doing selective actions, those will continue to improve with the additions of Windows. So the nice thing about having the cloud service as ATP is you're not necessarily needing to update anything in your ATP tenant. And I'll show you where you can enable preview features if you're looking to look at kind of the new and latest and greatest pieces that are coming. You're not having to update that, and you already have to update your Windows environment, which we spoke about, I think, in part one of this series on a regular basis. So now you can start taking advantage of those updates as you're kind of going down the road with ATP. From a licensing perspective, and I will always defer licensing to Jeff and Carson because I'm not a licensing expert by any means, but it is a requirement to have Windows 10 E5, Education E5, or 365 E5. And Jeff, can you confirm that that is an accurate statement?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Jeff. So from a licensing perspective, I know that was a question that we had early on in the conversation. Windows 10 E5, 365 E5, and then an OS version, at least Pro or Enterprise or Education. Right. So to deploy ATP on Windows 10 specifically, there's a couple of methods that you can use to get it there. There's a script that will configure the tenant settings for you in the operating system. If you have SCCM 1606 or later, which we're going to look at today, we'll look at the script configuration. We'll also look at the SCCM piece. You can deploy an ATP package that contains your settings it's more of an enterprise way to deploy it as opposed to a script because it's built into ConfigMan 1606 or later. Use Intune, group policy, and if you're in a VDI environment, whether it's persisted pools or not, you can use a VDI script that they have And whether you put it in before you seal up your image to push out in a PBS scenario, or you want unique identifiers on every VDI, there's certainly ways to get both of those done. So there's a lot of options here in your environment, whether you're running on a physical piece of hardware or you have everybody coming back through the data center or VDI environment. So again, we want to keep this as an introduction 101 level. I'm a bigger fan of going into the product than I am spending time on slides, because I think slides can only get you so far. So let's dive into the product. All right. So once you've signed up for an E5 and you have a tenant set up for you, so this is our test model environment that we have for ATP. Notice the URL, securitycenter.windows.com. Get refreshed here. The first thing you'll notice, I'm just going to take us through a walkthrough of what options are available in ATP and try to define some of these as we go. And then we'll talk about looking at an alert and chasing it down when we get to that piece of it. So on the dashboard area, there's a couple of dashboards that you have at your disposal. So there's some analytics about your environment, what your organizational score is, and those scores are made up of a couple of different pieces of if you're using application guard, smart screen, OS updates, those kinds of pieces. It's reading all that data from the machine to give you an overall score of the machines that you're running. And then you can drill through any one of these to get more data. We're not going to do that just yet because I want to spend some more time on these dashboards. In the security operations piece of it, this is an area that would look good on a screen inside of a data center somewhere that for someone that is really concerned about security, right? So as alerts come up, finding new alerts, defining them as active alerts and the dates that they happened on can pop up in this screen here. It gives you a nice little graph. It also gives you the machines that are at risk, the users that are at risk, and then the daily reporting metrics, sensor health that we have, service health. So it's a really good overview of what's going on in the environment. And so I think this is a good time to kind of drill through what happened on this suspicious PowerShell command line that was ran on the 10th of January, right? So this is, I don't know, 9 days ago. So let's find out what happened. So we click on the alert. Okay. So it takes us to the alert view, and in the alert view, we can see the title of the alert is a suspicious PowerShell command line. Just to give you some insights here, I did not set this up, right? This was all pre-configured for me, okay? So there was no magic that I set up to say, hey, if there's a PowerShell command line ran that I don't like, go monitor for it. It's not a rule that you set up and establish. This is predefined from all of that learning data that Microsoft has across the cloud. So here we have a severity is medium, suspicious activity is what it's categorized as, and then we have some things that we can do here. There's some actions, right? So we can manage the alert, which means we can assign it to somebody, which I'll get to here in a minute. We can investigate the alert, or we can print the alert, right? So we'll go through what that means in just a few minutes once we get there. In the alert context, you'll see what machine it happened on and who the user was that ran it. Okay, and then we have some recommended actions down here. So the description of what happened and occurred, this is pretty pre-canned, and then we have a recommended actions of what's happening, what you should do as way of resolving or remediating or investigating this piece. And so if you think about it in terms of those layers again, those security layers, people running PowerShell scripts may not necessarily trigger anything in your environment today as caught as suspicious. So while we use this as a post-breach, because technically the script is already ran as post-breach, this could also be another guard or another layer to your security to find out what's going on in kind of a more real-time or close to near-time scenario. So here's the script that I ran personally. But then maybe you're thinking, well, I don't know exactly kind of what it did or where it went and what happened, right? So we can see here that if I come down here and say I want to run this, we go back to the alert. Let's go back to the suspicious PowerShell command line view. One second. Looking for suspected alert view. There's a specific breakout. Maybe it's not actually on the alert. It could be on the actual. There's a breakout of what pieces and machines that it touched on the machine. And maybe it's actually the machine data now I'm thinking about it. Apologies here. I blame the cold medicine. There we go. Okay. So this is what I was looking for. If you want to look and follow the process that was ran, so this is on the machine that I'm running, you can see that the alert was opened, and we have a timeline slider for the graph that we can kind of narrow down. And I'll show you how to configure how much data is actually kept inside of your ATP tenant, so that if you only need the last 30, 60, 90 days for audit purposes, you don't need 180 days. I'll show you how to configure that. But from here, we can see that the suspicious command line ran. We're going to take a look at what actually occurred. So the command.exe ran is hidden. And you can see where it was started from, and we can kind of follow it down to what was going on with it and what it touched, all the way down to the actual command that was ran here, right? And everything associated with it. So if you think in terms of, well, what's going on with this DLL or a machine that is infected from an antivirus perspective, you don't need to necessarily configure anything. This is part of the machine heuristics that are just built in, that this data is what is getting sent to your private ATP tenant. So you can see things from Google Chrome, from the Office click-to-run piece that I run. You can drill down and see just about everything that happened and what's going on in the environment, right? So when you're talking about analytics and chasing down, how do you find out what's been affected or impacted in your environment? This is the path. This is a tool that enables you to do these things. Now from here, let's say that we saw that this alert happened and we want to take some actions on this machine, right? So I can come here and I can say, all right, I want to isolate the machine. When I isolate the machine, if it's 1703 or 1709, I have different options. And so 1703 will disconnect it from the network, leaving it, there will be a little message that pops up in the Action Center saying that an administrator has, basically disabled your machine. You'll need to call them. And then you have, in 1709, you have a more selective isolation. That selective isolation allows you to still let them work on Outlook and Skype for Business, but shut all the other traffic down on the machine. Now, even when you isolate the machine, it's still sending data to the OMS portal. So if you're still needing to collect data at the time, that data is still being sent up to that portal, so isolating it doesn't completely shut it off from feeding the engine. This collect investigation package action is a pretty robust series of actions. So as long as you're on 1703 or higher, it will gather the auto runs, the installed programs list, all network connections, the prefetch files, all the processes, scheduled tasks, the event logs, and services and current states of the services. Okay? In addition, it'll also grab SMB sessions, temp directories, the list of users and groups, and then a summary report that comes out into an XLS format for you to review. So there's a lot of data that is being gathered from this for you to investigate. So if you think about needing to send something to your security team, or maybe you are the security team, and you want to investigate what the impact was on the business, on the network, on the machine, you follow it along, and then you can gather all of the different processes and all the different elements that I just mentioned by using the Actions tab here. Now again, it requires certain editions of Windows 10. You can also add metadata tags or declarative tags to the machine if there's sorting or grouping that you want to do in here. And you can also release from isolation it gives you data about when you isolate. I'm not going to isolate it because it's actually the machine that I'm running on right now. So if I isolate it, it's going to get to be an awkward presentation. But the if you isolate it, there's still a way that you can go remove it from isolation and kind of get it back into operational status if you declared it as a non-issue. From a search perspective, down here, you can search for things like file names, extensions, paths, command lines that were ran, or even IP addresses on the machine, right? And you can add all the information levels or just detections, behaviors. You can sort event types, lots of different event types that are brought into the environment. Things from device guard exploits, network events, file events, registry, DLL loads. So if you know you're looking for something very specific related to a specific outbreak, it's a very easy thing to create a search process for or a filter and get that information. Once you have that information, you can add whatever list of events you want to put per page and export it as Excel to give to your security team or whoever else needs to have that information that may or may not have access into here. Moving on down the list, one more point to note about dashboarding. You can integrate with Power BI. So if you have Power BI in your environment, you can integrate and start creating really custom dashboards that maybe you want to display to different areas and have for different pieces of your business. Severities, alert status, machine counts, all those pieces. So if you're looking to build custom dashboards, reports for whatever you need, Power BI is clearly the place to go. There's also a desktop connector if you're running it locally. All right. So in the alerts section here on the left, we have all of the alerts that are here, whether they're resolved, in progress, or new. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then here's where you can actually manage the alert and assign it to someone. So if we go to here and we go to manage the alert, we can do some things to get this in and out of our infrastructure, such as maybe I want to assign this to my security architect. I'm going to assign him this or her. I'm going to assign them this incident for them to resolve and review. You can see the first activity. You can see the last activity. You can add comments to the actual incident itself. Create a suppression rule. Maybe this is not an actual problem in your environment, so you want to suppress that alert. In addition, you have different states. You have in progress and resolved. So if you notice, I have things that are in states of new or status of new. I'm going to move this one to in progress because I'm looking at it and it's assigned to me. Okay? So it's more of just organizing the alerts and making sure that somebody's doing something about them. If you wanted to go look at all the suppression rules, they would be all listed here. Again, the suppression rules created from an alert. All right, so machine list. So this is where if you have a plethora of machines, you can review the machines or look at the data of the machines. There's some easy graphs here of what the last internal IP address was of the machine, what the health state of it is, if it's active or not, if it's Azure AD joined or if it's locally joined to an on-premise domain, how many active malware alerts being fed from AV. You can export this data. There's also, again, you have the robust searches up here at the top. So if you want to just go to who requires attention and specifically who requires what attention, for example, is the sensor off? There's no sensor. AV is off. You can sort by all of these and then use that information to take action, such as exporting a list and maybe putting it into SCCM to resolve, right? So a lot of different ways to slice up from an analytics perspective the machines that are reporting well and that are not reporting well. Here we have the service Haloth. You can see that the service is operating normally, and then you can see that some telemetry issues that we had over time, it degraded. I think there's a little more information about it here. Yeah, so it was a problem. It's not a problem anymore. It was down for about 32 minutes in that instance. So probably during an upgrade, I would imagine. And then here in the left-hand side, and I know that I want to get time for questions, so trying to get through a lot of these settings here. So on the preferences setup, this is where you configure how long you want to retain that data. and then some analytics about your organization. Again, that helps feed the bigger pool of what's going on and what kinds of environments. Some advanced features here, blocking files, user details, Skype integration. If you wanted to be able to IM to a user directly from an incident, you certainly can. And then Office 365 threat intelligence. So if you're looking to scan mailboxes and Windows machines from Office 365, you can integrate with that. It does require an E5 license for that to happen. I could slide mine on. We don't have ours on in this preview tenant. Or this test tenant. So we have a preview experience. This is where you can get the new features set up into your ATP section under the previews area. So as they release features, you can get them first and see how they work. Set up some email notifications for your organization. For this purpose, I have my email address configured for high alerts to be notified on. You could certainly add more information for your security team if you wanted and different alerts for them. And you have your SIM integration. So I know I've been asked about this a lot, and there's a couple of integrations that's got pointed to. And what this allows you to do is it allows it to push data into the SIM tools, and it currently integrates with Splunk and HP ArcSight as two integration points. There's known documentation for it. More are being added overall. There's also a generic API that you can use to query information from and get tokens, and it's secured over OAuth 2, I believe. So if you're looking to get this integrated into your security infrastructure, you can put that into place. And then again, you can integrate with the Power BI dashboard, which I've done to kind of show you. And then some security analytics. If you know that you're using or not going to use some of these, this can affect your score on the overall organizational health. So if you don't necessarily, if you're not going to use Application Guard, I would remove it so that it doesn't affect your overall score against the organizational health. So there's some tweaks and tuning you can do here. So, okay, so the last piece of the demo that I really want to get to is how you configure the endpoints, because that's how you're going to onboard machines into your tenant. So here on the client's endpoint management side, you can see that there's the things that I'd mentioned in the presentation, group policy, SCCM, mobile device management through Intune, local scripts. These are all the options, and once you click these, you can then download them. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go through, and we're going to set this up in SCCM really quickly. So from here, show you how to do an SCCM. So I would imagine if you're looking at this piece, you can test it with the local script, which I'll show you. It's very easy to run. But more so, you're probably going to want to use and target an SCCM environment. So let's download the package. And what comes out of that is the Windows Defender.atp.onboarding. So what we'll do is grab that path. And inside of your SCCM environment, assuming you're at 1606 or higher, you go to the Endpoint Protection, Windows Defender ATP policies, right-click, create a new Defender ATP policy, test tenant policy. And are you onboarding or offboarding? We are onboarding people into our tenant. So from here, you can grab the .onboarding file, gives you the organizational ID out of that file. You can configure just a couple of things about the agent configuration. Which files or samples are shared by the ATP online service. We're going to go all file types, or you can say none, right? So what data are you feeding into? And then what's your telemetry reporting frequency, normal or expedited? You can look those up and figure out what the cadence for those are. You create your policy. Once you have your test tenant policy, you right-click deploy just like you would to any other collection. and then you wait for your endpoints to come on board into your tenant. That is the entire onboarding process from an SCCM perspective. And then if you're looking to test that PowerShell command that I ran, you can grab it. It's sitting here. It's sitting here into the portal, and I'm just going to run it to show you what it does. And you run that PowerShell, it's going to close, and the whoops. I can't remember if I have to. I got a lot of security features integrated on my machine. So it just makes the command shell go away because it's trying to run some things as hidden and download an invoice.exe that doesn't exist. So that'll show up as a suspicious command line that ran in my ATP portal. Now for servers, if you have the monitoring agent installed, here's your workspace ID and your workspace key that allows you to become part of the tenant to start sending the operations management agent data up into your tenant. And then again, you can run the same script to test it. And for non-Windows pieces, you can enable Bitdefender integration with Linux and Mac OS. And here's the detection test that you can run very similar to the PowerShell. We don't have that in our environment, but you could certainly feed it from there. So with that, the intent of these were to be 45 minutes, and we have about 5 minutes for questions. So I'm going to open it up for any questions that we might have here, and see what we see if there's any discussion we want to have.
Looks like there's a question. Is there role-based access to the console?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's probably 2 different levels of access, but I would have to get back to you on that. I know that it was supposed to change as of the last edition of the last release back in November. I'll get back to you on that. Take a note.
We'll respond. Let's see. We will respond back.
I can send that to the group if we need to.
Well, we can send that out with a recording.
Yeah, that's true.
Did you have any other questions about licensing? I believe we have James still on the line, our SSP, who might be for security.
So to clarify, this isn't part of the O365 Security Suite E5. That might be a good question for James. Yep, there he is.
All right.
Cool.
We'll include the answers to these questions in our follow-up.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jeff. So the next cut to the chase will be on February 16th, and we'll talk more about those layers of security. We'll talk about Azure MFA, both for Microsoft Online resources as well as on-premise resources. We use it internally here for a couple of different purposes. So if you're interested in multi-factor authentication, you want to see how it works, how it operates, we'll be putting that together. If you have any questions or want to learn more or see a private demo or really dig into some of the pieces of ATP, have help getting it onboarded, reach out to me directly or Jeff. Let us know. We're happy to help. My email address is on the screen. And I thank everybody for their time today. Hopefully you enjoyed the session.
Yeah, thanks very much. And just to reiterate, if you do want to do a security assessment, either a self-assessment or a partner like model to come in and help you with your security strategy, please let us know. We have a significant amount of funding available right now for customers that want to do that. And you can reach out to me. My email is jeffkaz@microsoft.com, and we'll help you out. But if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and end the session.
Yeah. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. It looks like James is putting a couple of the link to the trial if you want to give it a try for yourself in the IM window. And we'll include that on our follow-up.
Yep.
All right. I'm turning off the recording. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. And we'll talk to you again on the 16th of February.
Great. Thanks.